mine. And they're working while I'm missing you. Those healing hands of time. Soon they'll be dismissing you from this heart of mine. And they'll see me safely through the night, and I'll follow as though blind. My future safely clipped within those healing hands of time. America will heal on this Veterans Day.
Yes, yes. Thank you, John. And happy Veterans Day to everybody. Thank you, John, for having served in Vietnam and the Bronze Star and all those things. We are indebted to your service and your comrades and your team over there when you did such a great tour. You'll tell us in a moment how that was, and maybe we can celebrate on that. But I want to thank everybody. Great day today. Thank you for being with us. We have a great guest. And let me just quickly go around and say hello to Llewelyn. Llewelyn, how are you, sir?
Well, thank you.
Excellent, excellent. John, how do you feel about Veterans Day today? A little road trip back to Vietnam for 30 seconds.
I feel great about Veterans Day. Have to be a veteran. I love what I did, but I wouldn't wish it on anybody, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Yes. So I'm doing good.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we have a great guest today. Her name is Sharon Allan, and I'm happy to tell that I've known Sharon for a long time. And she's today the Chief Innovation Officer at SEPA, which is the Smart Electric Power Alliance, an organization that has been around for a while and has had some interesting mergers and acquisitions. And one of those mergers was to merge with SGIP, or the Smart Grid Interoperability Panel, which was something that Sharon used to be the CEO of, and she actually probably gets the credit of architecting that merger. And before that, Sharon was a managing partner at Accenture, and before that, president of Elster, which is now a division of Honeywell. Sharon, how are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm so excited to join the three of you today on this wonderful Veterans Day. So thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for being here. We look forward to your insights and wisdom. And so let's get it rolling here. So, the last time we talked, we had undecided world. There's still some, legal things going on in that undecided world. But, President-elect Biden has been confirmed clearly by the media, and, there's several states. And obviously, if you know the process really well, sometime in mid-December, all the secretaries of state will confirm the electoral votes and all that. And so that's coming down the pike. And, we're looking for calm and quiet. And fortunately, COVID is a little ruffling, a little up. Deaths are up and trending up. 6,000 or so deaths were added in the last 7 days. And unfortunately, the cases are going up dramatically. Some 700,000 cases were added in 7 days, which is kind of like, whoa, what's happening? And so in the middle of all that, clearly the economy continues to respond. And I think that the sort of divided possible government and where we're heading seems to be okay with the markets. And so the stock market, the Dow is up 1,400 points, and the New York Stock Exchange Index is up 660 points, and NASDAQ is at 187 points today, and the S&P is 115 points up. The price of oil crude is slightly down 6 cents from last week. It's at 37.14. And today's gas prices in the greater Austin area are up just barely 3 cents at $1.52 per gallon. Who would have ever thought that in 2020, the price of gasoline would be $1.52 per gallon in Texas? Unbelievable. Also, just a couple more elements to get all your take on where we're heading, where we're going. The October, in October, we added 638,000 new jobs, and unemployment rate, according to the government, has fallen down to 6.9%. So there is a recovery and there's a rehiring going on from the crazy days of early day COVID, and companies are resizing and reshaping. And so I'm curious I want to go straight to Sharon first, because you've seen the show before. And Sharon, what's your take on what's happening with COVID? We talk about it as an agent of acceleration of digital transformation, companies wanting to get their house in order, automate faster. And obviously there are some significant ramifications in the sectors that don't play in digitalization, like, entertainment industry and restaurants and things like that. But what's your take on what's happening, the economy? How do you look at it from your point of view? Are things moving up, down? You talk to a lot of utilities and enterprises every day. What's your take?
Oh, COVID's been really interesting. There's been some interesting good things, I would say, about COVID, and that from a utility standpoint, and many of our members, we have a little over 700 plus who are utilities, they've learned that they can continue to provide operations and customer service with remoting a good number of their people. So once it happened, because it is a critical service, they had to immediately go into gear on how they were going to have procedures for their field folks and who could be remote and how they go on doing it. The one thing that I've noticed about COVID, though, is that it really, in some ways, was an accelerant in terms of the focus on coal competing in the generation mix. And we have been tracking the number of utilities who not or legislated or forced to make commitments, who on their own volition have gone out and publicly made commitments. Right now, there are 33 utilities who have declared carbon-free or net zero by 2050, which is pretty significant. 59 have made publicly stated commitments. And what does that equate to? That's 68% of customer accounts are now served by a utility that has made a public commitment to be carbon-free or carbon neutral. And I think it was just last week, First Energy came out with their announcement. So since COVID happened, I really think in some ways that has really given a lot of focus to executives and the board on what's important to them. And so that's the good news. Now, the negative news is it has slowed a little bit of large projects that have been going on in the sector, and certainly affected some of the equity-based financing of some of the renewable projects. They're not canceled, they just kind of shifted a bit. So, there has been somewhat of an impact. Regionally, I don't think we can look and say overall, in some instances, residential's down and other residential's up. Some places C&I's down, some of it's neutral. Some industrial it kind of depends on the region. I think more so than COVID has shown utilities they can actually adapt and do things that they never thought they could do because they've had to. I think the other thing that's been a big trigger here in America besides COVID is the numerous number of natural disasters we've had between winds, hurricanes, fires, just crazy weather that has really impacted things.
Yeah, we just real quick, we were talking about that, and apparently, as I understand it, we have had over 27, I think we're on 30 hurricanes. So we ran out of letters in the alphabet, and now we're in the Greek alphabet or something like that. And it's the first time ever we've been in that reality. So fascinating.
Yeah.
So Llewelyn, any thoughts or comments for Sharon on where we're heading and what's going on?
Well, I do think it's interesting with all these utilities that have said they will be net zero by 2050. I wonder if that's in fact true, whether there won't be calls that there's been force majeure and it won't actually happen. The path is not clear to me as to how it's going to be achieved. It's not that far away, and the huge infrastructural changes will be necessary. What, for example, are they going to do about their huge dependence on natural gas? I don't see that disappearing very quickly, and I don't see wind and solar alone, those two alone, as being an adequate replacement for everything else.
Right.
And a vigorous nuclear program, I don't think you can get to the kind of carbon neutrality they're talking about. I think there might be a certain amount of verbal legerdemain going on as we approach the date. We've seen that before. Across the board, I think that the COVID situation is worse than we thought. We're going to have a very severe winter, huge fatalities, and we're not, because we get an immunization, because a medicine is available, that we're all going to get it, and we're all going to take it, we're all going to respond well to it, and suddenly the COVID-19 is in the rearview mirror. Personally, I think it will be with us for 2 or 3 years as we work through how the virus responds to the inoculations, whether they are, some are better than others. Distribution remains a large issue. The fact that it has to be delivered in cryogenic conditions, that is going to be a big challenge, not easily. If the army is going to be distributing it, as the administration has said, the room for things to go wrong there, the army is not known for that kind of efficiency. That's not its role, that's not its training, that's not its job. We are going to get through this, we are going to win. There will be a vaccine, there will be several vaccines, one will be superior to the others, and will gradually take on the bulk of the responsibility, but it isn't going to be quick, it isn't going to be overnight. The market has not responded to the state of the economy. The market has responded this week to the possibility of a vaccine arriving before Christmas, which is very exciting. But I think quoting the market is really, it's not the bellwether of the country. It is the bellwether of money. It's a separate thing. Don't get carried away by the market. I remember when Brazil was going down the tubes and the Brazilian stock market was going up to heaven. At some point, this all collapses, but it's not, we're not arrived there yet. A very difficult passage ahead. Global situation is not good at all, either with COVID or with international peace. A lot of unresolved issues. We have a war going on in Ethiopia. We have the war going on in Armenia. These things have results, they have consequences. The very least of those consequences when you have war is a huge flood of migrants seeking safety, seeking shelter. And that in the end impacts everyone to some extent, or everyone in some local region. Disruptions in Africa impact Europe. Disruptions in Central Asia impact the countries of Central Asia and eventually of Europe. So, you know, it's not a perfect situation. We don't know what the Chinese evolution will be like even 2 months from now, and we don't know where Russia is going or what is on the Russian collective mind. Russia has made huge advances. It's got what it's always wanted, a Mediterranean port. But ever since the end of the Second World War, our policy has been to keep Russia out of the Mediterranean. It's in with Libya. It's made its move. It's succeeded. And we have been so preoccupied with ourselves this last few years of self-preoccupation that we have forgotten we are part of a global situation and that Fortress America is not, in fact, a viable option.
John?
Yes, Sharon, First of all, welcome. And what I found interesting was something that we have talked about on this program, the whole idea of change. And for the utilities to think about adopting new change, or as we like to say, maybe it moves like a glacier in the heat of winter. And for you to say that what actually happened with the COVID, two things happened. The whole idea that change could be entertained in terms of different products, of how you can adopt. And what we've talked about on this program so much is remote management of people.
Mm-hmm.
Those are two huge things that goes across all industries, because in the context when we study organizational change or how industries change, we use the utilities as the model where there's no change. That's living on 1920 technology has, for the most part, been the same. So I was fascinated to see that because of COVID, there's adoptability that's happening in terms of how the management style goes. And there's adoptability in terms of just considering change itself. So I think that when we look at these things, it's going to be interesting for all companies to ask the same kind of questions. I think we agree, Andreas, that for corporate America, going to meetings might be out now.
Right.
All of that. So I think that's very, very interesting. In terms of the world, in terms of the world, I don't know if I can come behind Professor Llewelyn King on his analysis of the world, but we can certainly say the following. I think that this has allowed us to reconcentrate, if you will, on what's happening in the international situation. For example, without a doubt, the biggest competitor, quote unquote, is China. And when I say that, I mean everything from the technologies to saving the world. That is, if it's true that there is an invasion in a country outside of America, will America be called, or will China be called? I think also that the politics is very, very interesting. For my colleagues who are in political science, like Alan Sager, they see all of this as a natural laboratory to study the uncertainty of what happens when a president refuses to step down, to allow their students to do case studies on the impact on international affairs, the impact on internal affairs, the impact on the next election. So in a sense, we will all learn something about this in a painful kind of way. But certainly right now, we are in one of the most unprecedented situations that the country has ever been in. Now, you got to keep this in mind also. There are elements of America who really don't care what happens in Washington. And there are elements of America who says that it is very, very important as to what happens in Washington. But in this case, it is important to everyone. Mm-hmm. So what a great bad experiment for political science students and political science professors to cover and essentially to write books on. But what we do know is in this world of whether it's local, whether it's international, that change is coming about very, very rapidly. So as these things play out in unprecedented situations, then it's interesting to look what the ending would look like. And I challenge anyone here to say that would be simply smooth going from now on. Do we have a president who understands that if his colleagues go against him, then they also lose their base when they run from the Congress or the Senate? So it's beyond predictability. It's beyond what we have seen before. We have seen it in other banana republics, but for the most part, in my lifestyle, chance, my lifetime, and my father's great-grandfather's great-great-grandfather, we have not seen this unprecedented political time. And as Llewelyn said, the economy will find its way like water finds its way through rocks.
Absolutely. I think that, your all's insights are very interesting. I just want to be remiss not to remind us of the following. We are a republic made out of colonies coming together, statehoods. And while we are an imperfect union, it's probably the most fail-safe government construct ever created, because, you know, while in many ways, standards, centralization, coordination, it yearns for the need of a federalist view, a top-down approach to everything. It is that imperfection of 14,000 cities, 50 states, and the autonomy of local state government that makes this country, including the grid itself, impenetrable and indestructible as one button destroying the whole thing in one day. It's just not possible to disassemble the United States of America. And that is a great competitive advantage. This is what makes this country so resilient and difficult to sort of topple down. And so I just remind you all of that, because a lot of people say, oh, the grid can be shut down in 1 second. And having built the grid, partially built the grid in Texas, I can guarantee you that that's not possible. It's an interconnected grid that is loosely, safely put together, and it would be impossible to take it down. And similarly, all the other things in this country. So I remain optimistic that we will continue to move forward. That said, let me just get your all take on one of the things that we track. We track telecom and 5G. And I've said over and over that 5G is going to transform how we live. And when you look at what's happening with 5G, just quickly, Qualcomm Ventures put money into 4 new companies to steer the pot on 5G and accelerate. So these companies are Cellwise, which is an optimized network management, Salona, which is in private LTE and 5G integration, Pensando Systems, which is on edge computing, and Azion Technologies on mobile edge computing. And so the fact that, you know, if you're tracking what's going on with 5G and all the companies that play in that space and how their stock and their sales are going through the roof, clearly 5G is going to enable a new dawn. Now, you know, 5G for most people is thought of as only an element that impacts, you know, personal communications, human to human. But I think that 5G on its private deployment, which is being, shown over and over by Samsung and their partnership with, KT to basically deploy private networks in South Korea, and the same thing going on in Belgium and in Italy and France and all over, and IBM teaming up with IBM to build private network capabilities, and what's going on with Dish and Intel. And it's just fascinating that we're going from a world, you know, highly dominated by public carriers offering services so you and I can talk and tweet each other, to the ability of multiple networks building capabilities like never before. And so, Sharon, what do you see? You've been in this space for a long time. You used to sell AMI and a proprietary technology. What do you think is happening in the telecommunications world and its impact into real-time networks, and where is the industry going? What is the utilities talking about?
So, you know, I'm probably, maybe I should be more optimistic than what I am. When I came into the industry, I mean, what brought me into the sector out of IBM many years ago was telecommunications. So I've lived through telemetry, data tech, Mobitex. Probably those who haven't grown up through telecom probably never even heard of those words, you know. Those were the very, very early data packet networks. And communications is really core as we start automating more things in the network, because from a control standpoint, the electric grid, and I'm sure many of you have heard this, it is one of the most complex systems in in the world.
Mhm.
And we can't rely, as we have, especially more distributed energy resources, intermittent resources via renewables, we can't rely on human command and control. And so we're going to have to automate things more, and communications becomes the table stakes in order to do it. So I came into the industry, I fully believe it is foundational for the future of how we're going to operate the grid.
Mhm.
I'm a little jaded in that I came in the 90s, and I'm not as close to the communications stuff anymore, not as hands-on, but every once in a while I still get invited to meetings or invited to speak, and I think, oh, I'm going to be so outdated. I sit in the room and the conversations really haven't changed that much in 25 years. So that's a little disappointing. So I do believe, yeah, with 5G, and it's interesting. I don't know if any of you guys follow Anterix
Mhm.
with doing private broadband in the 900. You know, the one thing about communications is constantly evolving. That's the good news. The bad news is so many of our assets for keeping our infrastructure reliable, and it has to run 24/7 in the heat of Arizona to, you know, the cold up in Montana and stuff. And you can't deploy technology that is like a cell phone that's on, you know, hey, the new iPhone 12 Max Pro. I got my Max Pro last year at Christmas. Okay, there's a 12. We can't rip out assets in the field on a 12-month technology cycle or 18 months. Just the economics won't work, and customers bear the price of that if we were ripping out technology. So it's a balancing act. You need a technology because we need the communications technology, but we're never going to always be on the bleeding edge of what's coming out. The big thing that has never, I mean, in the last 20 years that I've been part of it, there's a lot of talk, and people still talk, oh, we're going to use one comm network for meter reading and SCADA and video at the substation and mobile to the trucks and behind the meter to control the thermostats in the house. And I mean, there's just so many hurdles, and we're going to read gas and water meters. Just jurisdiction between water utilities and electric, and we're going to have a smart city and look at the street lights and stuff. At the end of the day, there's no one owner, and the capital cost is so large that there isn't anybody who's going to bear the risk to roll out a multi-use communications infrastructure shared by multiple entities. And if you recall, Andres, 10, 15 years ago, IBM, there were a lot of big names, smart cities. It was in their annual report. You'd see it in their 10K. You don't hear a lot of discussion about that from some of those people. Yes, smart cities is still being talked about, but for the most part, it's pilot. It's like little neighborhood, downtown. A mayor wants to, you know, do something, but I'd say for the most part, we've been wildly unsuccessful on smart cities here in America. And the bottom line is, there's who's going to pay? Who's going to put out the capital? Who's going to pay the price? And
that's very interesting, Sharon. I've done work with Anterix and written about them, and have been covering them now for over a year. So that's very interesting. I also, they're offering a 4G private network for people who don't know. And I think they're being a little bit overwhelmed with this idea that 5G can do everything. I've been very negative about 5G, not that it's not coming or it won't have a role, but I think it's being very hyped at this point in time. And it may be a little bit like the Segway, which was going to change all transportation, and it never did. It's gone out of business finally. where we need innovation, I think, is in electric utilities. And I wrote a piece recently pointing out that really some industries remain with their footing in the 19th century. For utilities, the great step forward is to wind and solar, in that they, for the first time, stop boiling water. Otherwise, their whole existence has been how to find efficient ways of boiling water, whether it was nuclear or coal. But we haven't seen huge breakthroughs, dramatic things that have changed the whole use of the whole generation and delivery of electricity. Very hard to change. No brilliant idea has come through. People keep trying to find out if there is some better way to deliver it. I think that we've become very narrow-minded, and we go from one desired way of making it to another desired way of making it. I went through the nuclear evolution and then the natural gas, the aeroderivative turbine, and what that did. And now we're in the solar, and to some extent, these things are determined not by the good judgment of the utilities, but by the bad judgment of their opponents. For example, I sat through many meetings where environmentalists in the 70s and 80s, in their antipathy to nuclear power, were pushing coal. Fluidized coal beds were the answer to everything. And when acid rain came along, they said high stacks, taller stacks, which that of course didn't work. It sent our pollution to Canada, Britain's pollution to the continent. It didn't work. But you know, there has not been a big invention, a big breakthrough in the utility field, probably ever. It's extraordinary that we are so utterly dependent. It is, modern society is electrified, and yet how we make the electricity remains surprisingly primitive.
Well, you know, John, if you'll let me comment, because, you know, sometimes I think people, it's easy to want to bash the utility. And I think it's a little unfair personally, because, you know, I came into the industry when we still had analog devices, and they've moved to solid state, and we are integrating communications and using software. So I'm not saying, Llewelyn, you say this, but a lot of people act like, you know, the utilities are dumb and they're not innovative. And I say that's not a fair depiction. There's been a fair amount of innovation. I do think they struggle in terms of research and development. And if you look at the percent of R&D spend in our sector versus, let's say, technology sector, it's just, I mean, it's just probably not even 0.5%. It's really a fraction, but that's not the fault of the utilities. That's the fault of our system, because they can't get the ability to invest in what is considered R&D or are at risk. So then we lean on our government, and the government is looking for things that, I mean, they are making investments, and how do you convert lines? It's still very early days on hydrogen, and carbon capture and sequestration is still not economic, but you got to do the R&D in order to get to the point where it's economic, or direct air capture to pull it out, or electrolysis to be able to create some hydrogen, or long-term storage. And there's a number of programs that our federal government, funded by the Department of Energy, is doing to help with this transition. Now, it's not here and now, but there is efforts underway. And so I do think, utilities recognize that, and they know that they need some new technologies to help them reach their 2050 goals.
Yeah. John?
Well, I think that utilities are where computers were 50 or 60 years ago. No standardization. Some people running Lotus 1, 2, 3. Some people running Excel. And I think if you look at what's really, really happening, it's a private-public partnership. If for a general enterprise, the technology would have taken it out a long time ago. and we would have something else. I think that sitting on the shelf are technologies for the grid edge. We can make the computers that the utilities could resemble more like computers. What that means then, if it's, and of course, it all brings into play the whole idea of getting hacked and et cetera. When the grid goes down in New York, not a localized grid, it's standardized so that we can pick it up in Texas and help out in Texas. And the question is, are the technologies sitting on the shelf? And you tell me that the technologies for the grid edge in America is we might have the technology on the shelf, but we have a utility program. We reinvent the research. As a professor, I love getting research grants. Research and the new technologies are never commercial. So I think we're at a public-private partnership. And the question is, how do you take out a public-private partnership? If you look at what happened at Sears and Roebuck, it was just completely taken out, by more aggressive Walmart. If you look at what happened to TWA, it was taken out by Southwest Airlines. The theoretical question is, how do you improve upon a public-private partnership where you have so many people that's got a vote on it, so many interests, and so many different kinds of technologies? So I think if we look at the computer industry as an analog and say, okay, this is where the computer industry was, 50 years ago. Now everything is kind of standardized. When something happens, if you're on Microsoft and something happens, it's fixed. There are downloads that takes place, and it's fixed. So I think every city, every region, every state might have its own little entity. That was also once true with computers also. Mm-hmm. So I think public-private problem, and I don't see how you can literally take it out, because you can't take it out like you were doing, as Schumpeter would say, creative destruction. So it's going to be bits and pieces, and we will continue to live with the 1928 technology as we move rapidly into the 21st century.
I couldn't agree more, and I would say that as you say, John, every time we talk over and over, that we just need to make the grid in the United States, Texas, great. Because,
you like it. I got to do that.
Because the grid in Texas is probably, and I know a lot of the utilities nationwide would argue with me about this, but we are probably 5 to 10 years ahead on how we function. But before we get back, and Llewelyn raised his hand, let me take 30 seconds to do my reminder of the Digital 360 Summit. So we had our annual conference, and hopefully you can see this in August, and it went fantastic. And we had over 70 speakers and 900 registrants, and we're working on publishing 11 white papers and 28 videos now, anytime, coming up soon. And this is the list of companies that spoke. It was fantastic. It was actually quite incredible. And the videos will do a phenomenal recount, and people will be able to enjoy them for free. And we announced our new conference to be May 18th, 19th, and 20th here at San Marcos at the Embassy Suites Conference and Spa Center. And that's going to be a face-to-face event, God willing. And we will obviously follow all the COVID-19 guidelines. I'm sure there will be a new set of guidelines emerging in the next few days or months as the new administration impacts how we go about normalcy. But we're looking forward to a face-to-face event. And then I want to thank Texas State University for sponsoring the Digital-Roundtable. So let me kind of give you some more tidbits on information, and you can comment on where things are heading. Again, we're tracking this transformation every 7 days. And to me, it's just amazing the amount of acceleration and deals and things that are happening, regardless of the state of the economy, the pandemic, and what have you. So Intel this week just previewed and showcased their first version of Wi-Fi 7. So most of you don't even have Wi-Fi 6. Wi-Fi 6 gives you speeds of 10 gigabits per second at home. And Wi-Fi 7 has been introduced by Intel, delivering 50 gigabits per second at home. I mean, it is outstanding to think from AOL email, you got mail at 56 kbps, kilobits per second, to where we're heading. I mean, this is just mind-boggling. Video everywhere, you know, virtual reality goggles, you know, augmented reality, you know, holograms everywhere, people projecting stuff on the walls. I mean, this is just incredible, right? And when you think about what's going on in smart buildings, which is what we're, you know, Wi-Fi 6 and 7 will impact first, you got companies like Mobility, you know, a new specialty mobile player bringing 5G capabilities to stadiums, in this case, the Tampa Bay Stadium with the Rays play, right? And Cody Labs providing smart building operating systems to Austin's River South building. This is a company outside of Austin that is not even a startup in Austin. And you got Cellnex doing all kinds of things on 5G networks for BSAF in Spain, you know, the company that is, you know, hidden in everything that we eat and touch. And British Telecom signing all kinds of, you know, capabilities for smart buildings in Belgium. I mean, clearly, you know, I mean, think about the smart building sector. I mean, it's exploding, right? And smart buildings become a key element working with a utility in this whole distributed energy resource collaboration, right? If they go off the grid or DG or what have you. I mean, it's just fascinating what's happening and what, you know, the evolution of smart buildings seem to be going. And so, Sharon, what's your take on the conversation that happens in the transformation of the grid and utilities around how do smart buildings is forcing the hand of the industry to change?
Yeah. So I think as people, you know, kind of go back to where I started with folks looking at how they reach their carbon targets.
Mm-hmm.
So new building construction is a little bit different than retrofit. So
Right.
focus first on new building, especially if you're in the warmer climates or Southeast, starting to looking at electrifying buildings and using the load of the building
Mm-hmm.
as a balancing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just about, you know, the customer's interested in smart, and let you know it's still evolving. I mean, I tried to make this house we're living in now smart, and still I spent more automating and putting in the brains than probably the first 3 cars I ever owned in my life. And doggone if the stuff still doesn't work well together. It drops between the audio and, you know, my lighting, extremely frustrating. So it's still evolving on the residential home front. But in terms of buildings, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab is very focused right now, and they are doing a number of things to look at how buildings can participate
Mm-hmm.
in the grid. And so
Don't you think quickly, don't you think that the mandate in California of every new building having solar PVs, it's forcing the utilities in California to rethink how they're doing this? What are they saying?
Yeah, it is. Now, personally, I'm not one that believes in being prescriptive on a technology, because it causes other market aberrations to sometimes occur. We've seen dictations of storage in New York and stuff. So it certainly is affecting things where, you know, there's places ruling no gas or saying, you know, everything has to have solar, which contributes to, okay, then how do we, now we're going to have greater electric loads on the house, which can affect demand, especially if you have solar. Now this is affecting, I put solar on this house, you know, so the house I'm in right now, I put my own solar in just because I couldn't find a community solar to be part of. And, you know, I like to watch my demand and what's going on with the cloud coverage and things like that. So once you start electrifying more things, then you can kind of look at, how can I manage that to affect what my load is on different areas, and especially if there's other things going on and I need to alleviate some congestion on a particular feeder. So using the buildings is something that people are looking at. Now, to me, is this new? Well, we used to call those demand side management programs 30 years ago, right? So I'm like, well, gosh, does that sound new? In the end, the idea of being able to move, reduce or shift load is not new. I think what's new is that there's new technologies that can do that in a more automated way versus sending people text or calling them or publishing on the internet and relying on building owners to go, tweak their building management system, or residential customers to run around and turn off appliances. We're talking about doing things in such a seamless manner that you, as a person within the building or a residential customer, depending on, you don't really know it's happening because it's so much more subtle. Versus, back in the 80s when we had load control, they turn your air conditioner off or your hot water and doggone, you wouldn't take a shower and it was cold. So I think what's new is the technology, but I think the concepts have been there for a very long time.
Agreed.
So my question is, when we start plugging in automobiles and 18-wheelers and et cetera, is the grid prepared to do that? It's prepared, because it's not like taking a, I mean, when I think when you plug in an automobile, it's like a download. It's not like
yeah. When you say
handle the EVs that's coming and everything to plug in. That's the commercial question, I think.
Yeah. And, you think about, so you said the word semi-truck, we don't have charging stations along most highways. And guess what? There's not like the wires aren't along the highways either. So that's expensive if we're going to get the wires to where the highways are. So there's a lot that has to be worked out if that really is the direction that things need to have it along the interstates. But the way people are looking at it in terms of fleets right now is, are there uncongested parts of a distribution grid, or can I microgrid in order to be able to put in storage to be able to handle that demand at a very concentrated location? So a lot of interest right now on how to solve that as people start to plan ahead of the uptake on medium and light duty trucking vehicles.
Well, I think entrepreneurs will handle that. I think Llewelyn would tell you that in Texas, we would handle that. We would not wait on to do that. And we will have our own microgrids running up and down the highways. And that would be an entrepreneur project. Because Llewelyn loves Texas. And he would tell you that Texas.
Actually, I'm doing more and more work in Texas. I note for the record that it was 40 minutes into the broadcast before the infomercials for Texas began. The intensity has been up to the old standard. I would like to congratulate Sharon, because I agree with her that utilities do get a bad rap. People forget, I was talking to in Texas, the CEO of a utility last week, and she reminded me, as I should have been reminded, that the one thing about utilities is they have to keep the lights on 24/7, 365. And that's like air traffic control. That's a big discipline. And if you've achieved that, you can feel a certain sense of satisfaction. Innovation in the computer world, Johnny, came largely because you had double demand. You had demand from the government for better computing. I was at Sandia National Lab once, and there was limited accommodation. There's a small motel, And I was talking to this young lady at breakfast, and she said, well, I sell computers. And I said, oh, that must be hard. She said, oh, no, I'm with Craig. They buy everything we make before we've made it, which is a terrible sales situation. And you had the public demand. With electricity, the public is satisfied. The lights are on. We're on this broadcast. We're not yearning for more of this vanilla commodity. We love it the way it is. And that is a reduction in the force of innovation. And you've got a regulated industry. So that this also tends to inhibit big innovation quickly. Nonetheless, I think almost you could say statistically, the utility industry is overdue to some great invention. And they have been slow to adopt new things. I used to give an annual lecture to the Electric Power Research Institute, and I knew every year to the Technical Information Coordinators, the TICs, as they were called. And I knew what the question would be. It would be, Mr. King, how can we get the utility to adopt the things we have invented with their money for them? It could have been a better pole, a better insulator, a new program, but there was some reluctance to change, a certain conservatism that was deeply part of the electricity culture. And I think it's still there, but I think it's been modified. I think there's a genuine determination, indeed a need to innovate. We talk innovation all the time. And just as a throwaway, big change coming from COVID-19, innovation in medicine. It will probably dwarf the rate of innovation in anything else.
Sure.
I'm covering that too, and I find it fascinating and exciting. We've come to think of innovation as only affecting things to do with telephones and computers, electromagnetic things. There are other things that are innovating, and an enormous excitement after we've conquered COVID-19. There'll be huge excitement in medicine.
It would be biology. You're right. The next industry is biology. I agree.
So let me, as we're heading into the final stretch here, just kind of summarize what's going on in smart cities, smart energy, and get your take on it. I have to tell you, all that you know, it used to be, or we were talking for a while back that you know, probably the most important sector of innovation on industries in general was the regulatory element, sort of the policy element, the rules of the game, if you will. But when it comes to electricity, you know, FERC Order 2222, some people call it 2x4, Order 841 and Order 745 are really watershed orders that are forcing the redefinition of how distributed energy and central energy come to play. And obviously technology is the sort of the linchpin to enable that seamless integration that Sharon was talking about. And clearly, you know, COVID has, you know, because of the value of the markets and the, you know, the value of utilities have come down in market cap. I mean, there's an incredible M&A stuff going on, you know, Florida, PSC, you know, it's watching all kinds of things that are going on. Xterra Energy is trying to acquire now Evergy. There's all kinds of things going on with American Electric Power and their investments and you know, in trying to get rid of coal plants and accelerating the sale of assets and all kinds of, you know, big fish eating little fish, and including the fact that some munis and co-ops are getting into the game. You know, Three Rivers Electric Cooperative just ate a chunk of Amaranth in Missouri. And so there is all this activity going on, and the shuffling of the org chart and the balance sheets is happening as we speak, and everybody's kind of getting ready for the future. But I also want to, you know, and I would love to get your comments on that, the acceleration of the M&A, sort of the precursor of new deployment and execution and automation usually of things. But another thing that we didn't get feedback from you all last week, and is the comment of the gig economy. The gig economy, the Gen X's, the Gen Z's, transforming the planet, Uber, And so the victory of Lyft and Uber in California and Proposition 22 basically being won by them, and the fact that, 1099 part-time employees are here to stay, even in the almighty California state. What are your takes of the viability of the gig economy being a catalyst of transformation for industry going forward, and what's happening with the M&A state of the electric industry in general? Sharon?
So I think, when you look at, the M&A activity, some of it is balancing a portfolio, and some of it is there's a lot of cash and they need to put their working capital to use somewhere. And so that often is behind it. When you start looking at what happens post-merger, boy, is it tough in some ways. I won't call it a distraction, but there's definitely a lot of work to then pull through those synergies, because most utilities aren't going to have the exact same systems configuration. And so if you want to pull through some operational synergies, it on the back end post M&A, there's a whole work plan that has to go behind that. In terms of, the Gen X, the millennials, the giga, I think, I think it will evolve and happen. And my children, who are grown men, they definitely don't think like myself. They have a completely different perspective on stuff. At times very hard for me to relate to. It was just so different generationally to how I grew up. I think a lot of us who are now are getting near retirement age will accelerate that, because this generation behind us, they look at it differently, they respond differently. And I think just that influx, as we're pushing out those into retirement, that will be a catalyst that enables this change to keep going.
Where I said M&A is a good, I always said there are two economies. There's a corporate economy, and then there's my economy, which is the startup economy. You really see an acceleration with the fact that in the 1980s, what we did, we put all the research in major research universities out of labs from corporate America, because they were less likely to be innovative, such as IBM, and we know the list. And so what's happening now is that all of the research in startup companies, so the startups really do the research now for corporate America. And as corporate America reinvents itself, for those who have great management, what we call creative management, for example, Michael Dell kind of disbanded his old model and bought 20 plus startups to compete. And we see this in the communication industry. So I see merger and acquisition as a great equalizer of what we said in the 1980s. We're going to move, create something called major research universities. There will be some research in industry, but for the most part, industry will stop doing the research. So they're reaching down and pulling up all those things. The gig economy, they would find themselves. And the question is, remember, business is science. IBM is really a computer science company. Microsoft is a computer science company. Southwest Airlines is the science of flight. And if other countries become more innovative than we are, if you turn your computer on and it's not the science that's come from America, that's when things will change. So I think what the gig economy generation faces is the fact that America dominated, for the most part, the last century on innovation and creativity, from the automobile to flight. And now we're not sure if that domination will take place. We have to realize that business is science. I was a professor in China, and 70% of the students are majoring in the sciences, right? Not in business per se. And I think that they will face a different kind of world based on where the science comes from. And science is at the very, very base of all business models, because it is the science that really changes the business models. It is not management, accounting, and finance. It is the science that changes it. So they're in for the ride of their life.
Well, unfortunately, I have to agree with John again. However, let me say about the gig economy, I'm very keen on the gig economy because it both increases the flexibility for the individual and the flexibility for the corporation. But you need to make adjustments in social systems to accommodate the gig worker, social security, other things which, other benefits which employed people have, the gig worker does not have, and those should be extended and incorporated. Also, you need to find mechanisms outside of unionization, perhaps, to increase to not so much increase the pay of the gig worker, but to prevent the exploitation of the gig worker. So the gig worker has reasonable expectations, but basically I love it because the gig worker is in business for herself or himself, and that's truly exciting. I come from a long line of people who never did terribly well, but were always self-employed, and I've kept the tradition going.
Llewelyn, when you drive my bus when I retire, and Willie Nelson is going to give me his bus.
We'll go down a roadhouse and do some research.
In the name of social research. So I want to thank you all for being with us today. And Sharon, what a delight to get you to share your thoughts. And I don't know if you have any parting thoughts or wisdom nuggets or a summary in your take of what we're trying to do here, but we are totally focused on tracking digital transformation in different sectors of the industry. And I think that, you know, the work that you have been doing all your life fits very well into what we're doing. So any parting thoughts or wisdoms on what's happening and maybe where things are headed?
So, hey, well, thank you guys. I've really enjoyed the conversation with you guys today. I guess my parting thought would be transformation is never done, because new innovation comes along. And so I think we've become more socially aware. We are more aware of climate than we've ever have been. The weather's changing on us. And as a result, the need for innovation is one that is something that has to be fully embraced. And with our new rising workforce coming in with a different set of perspective and having grown up digital, I mean, that's table stakes, communications and digital table stakes. You won't be able to do business unless you have that. So I really appreciate the conversation with you three gentlemen today, and it was a delight. So thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Llewelyn, any parting thoughts?
Sharon, it's a great honor to be on with you, and it's nice to see you again after so long.
Absolutely wonderful.
Hey, Johnny, you want to take us away?
Yes, as she said, it's always now. It's always now. Nothing ever goes away. Everything is here to stay. It's always now. It's always now. There never was a used to be. Everything is here with me. It's always now. So brace your heart. Find yourself some sanity. It's really only you and me. It's always now.
Fabulous, John. Fabulous.